If you love to read, you face a dilemma. With so little time and so many books, how do you decide what to read, especially if you want to read high-quality books? High quality is a value judgment that begs the question, who decides what's worth reading? The literary critic Harold Bloom attempted to answer that question in his book, The Western Canon, The Books and School of the Ages. You might be familiar with the concept of a canon through religious texts. For example, Jews, Catholics, and Protestants each formally chose different books to be canonical in their versions of the Bible. The process of canonization for creative literature is very different. It's an organic process of influence between writers from one generation to the next. Harold Bloom's book is a passionate elegy for this process, written at a time when he believed the very idea of the Western canon was under attack. Today we're diving into what he meant by the canon, why he defended it so fiercely, and its pragmatic use for readers like you and me.
Well, the canon really means, from Greek days onwards and from ancient Hebraic and Christian days onwards, the works that a particular tradition designates as being most essential for study by the young in scholastic situations.
Watching Harold Bloom in a television interview is amusing. The man had a lot to say, and to watch someone of his intelligence and his big personality have to reduce his thoughts down into a soundbite, it's pretty hilarious. Now, in his book, The Western Canon, Bloom explains that the concept of the literary canon is much more than simply a list of books taught in schools. The concept of the canon has evolved over time, and so too has the list of books considered to be canonical. I mean, after all, new books are written all the time, and some works that may have been considered to be canonical in the past have fallen off simply because they've lost their influence. For example, the subgenre of the historical novel, in Bloom's opinion, has lost its canonicity. Now, the literary canon evolves through a process of influence from one generation of writer to the next. And in the case of historical fiction, it's simply lost its influence among great writers. The deepest truth about secular canon formation is that it is performed by neither critics nor academies, let alone politicians. Writers, artists, composers themselves determine canons by bridging between strong precursors and strong successors. Harold Bloom devised his own criteria for canonicity. In order for a poem, a play, or a novel to be canonical, it must be strange or uncanny in a way that we can't quite assimilate it. No matter how much we try to normalize it, we can't quite make sense of it. Dante's Divine Comedy meets this criteria. Alternately, a work may be so strange or uncanny that we no longer see it as strange. Shakespeare meets this criteria. Romeo and Juliet has been normalized as a tragic but beautiful love story. The work must be strong aesthetically, and it also must be agonistic. Agon is the Greek word for conflict or struggle, and without this, a work is not canonical. A work must be influenced by canonical works that preceded it. In the process of misreading or misinterpreting those canonical works, a new creation arises. Bloom called this the anxiety of influence. And finally, in order for a work to be canonical, it must demand another reading. If you read a work for a second or third time and you gain no new insights or develop no new awareness from that reading, then the work is not canonical. The Western Canon is an arrangement of 21 essays about 26 writers whom Bloom considers to be canonical. His hero, William Shakespeare, is the central figure, and the other 25 writers are compared to him in some way. For Bloom, quote, "Part of the secret of Shakespeare's canonical centrality is his disinterestedness. Shakespeare is almost as free of ideology as are his heroic wits, Hamlet, Rosalind, Falstaff. He has no theology, no metaphysics, no ethics." End quote. Bloom's admiration of the bard for these qualities of neutrality is a key part of understanding why he felt the literary canon needed to be defended so ferociously. By the late 20th century, the concept of the canon had been politicized by both the left and the right. Bloom felt that the canon's raison d'etre was for literary and not political purposes. Based on the 18th century philosopher Giambattista Vico's three-phase cycle of society, Bloom categorizes 4,000 years of literature into 4 ages: the theocratic age, the aristocratic age, the democratic age, and what he calls the chaotic age. That's the 20th century. In his appendices, he includes lists of canonical books from each of these ages. He was hesitant to do so because he didn't want to create required reading lists. He felt that engagement with literature should be a more organic process rather than reading from a prescribed list. However, his editors suggested the idea and he went along. Despite his reservations, these lists, often referred to as Bloom's Western canon, are what many readers treasure most about his book. Of the hundreds of authors in his canonical lists, Bloom chose to write essays about the 26 for their originality and their sublimity. He was once asked, what would a person get out of reading Shakespeare or the other canonical authors?
Well, in the first place, I would say cognitive power. That is to say, an increase in one's own ability to think and one's own ability to talk on the basis of that thinking. And the next would be rhetorical power, the ability to understand better the uses of metaphor, which according to Aristotle was the special mark of genius in every one of us. But beyond all that, a real capacity for apprehending otherness, for, on the one hand, realizing that we are trapped inside our own mortality, and on the other, that our only hope of getting beyond that trap of mortality is to have some real sense of other selves. We read many books, is the ancient adage, because we cannot know enough people. You are still a young man. I am now getting to be a rather older man. One discovers as one gets older that it's difficult to know more and more people. That your old friends have pretty much said what they have to say to you or you to them. And it's harder to make friends. One goes back to books because one cannot possibly know enough people.
We can't discuss Harold Bloom without discussing how opinionated he was. Now, there are times when I found his bombast to be quite humorous, and other times it made me angry. But at the heart of the Western canon is Harold Bloom's defense of the canon against politicization. He called the far left the school of resentment, a term he devised to refer to academic movements that politicize the canon. He argues that the literary canon is not about race, it's not about gender, it's not about sexuality. It's about writers influencing writers from generation to generation. But the far right does not escape his ire. On the far right, critics lambasted him for not upholding the literary canon as the example of higher Western moral values. The Western canon was published in 1994 at a time when Harold Bloom felt that academic literary study had become so politically polarized that it was beyond redemption. Now, I consider myself to be a centrist, and even I was put off by some of his seemingly offensive statements about pseudo-feminists. And it wasn't until my second reading of his elegy to the canon that I started to get past his bombast and really started to understand his message. Harold Bloom felt that no matter how honorable a political cause like social justice might be, it had nothing to do with greatness in literature. Literature is art. It's an equal opportunity dialogue between writer and reader, regardless of the social demographics of either. There are those who oppose the concept of the Western canon because they believe that those who uphold it view the West as morally superior. But the literary canon isn't about morals or politics. Western is simply a demarcation between very broad Western and Eastern cultural traditions. The East has its own literary canon, and in some cases, Asiatic works like the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Quran can be claimed by both broad cultural traditions. Harold Bloom focused the Western canon on the West because that was where his expertise lay. To Bloom, using literature to push an ideology, whether it's social justice or moral superiority, is missing the point. To read in the service of any ideology is not, in my judgment, to read at all. So, should you read Harold Bloom's book, The Western Canon, The Books and School of the Ages? Well, it depends. The 21 essays that he writes about the 26 authors are dense and demanding. They assume that you already have read those works and have a lot of the background knowledge. So I think your time would be better spent reading the canonical works, and then if one or two of them grab you, refer back to the corresponding essay in Bloom's book. On the flip side, the book is worth reading simply for Bloom's elegy to the canon. So this is in the beginning of the book and it concludes in the end. And that is the real part of the Western canon that I enjoyed the most. In this personal essay, Bloom's passion really shines through. He definitely can be frustrating at times, but if you work through it, he is brilliant and he's highly entertainment. He has a very strong voice, he's opinionated, and he is unapologetically literary. He actually inspired me to read canonical works, to start a blog, and to even start this YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this review, please give this video a like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. What's your take on the Western canon? Is it an outdated concept, or is it an essential guide to reading? Let's talk about it.